I think who he is as a person, he's got as much integrity as I've seen in my 30 plus years in this business. It is a tough day for me because as an athletics director, it's important to do all of the things. We're in this to win championships. We have to make sure that we're doing that with in light of how we're comporting ourselves and conduct and citizenship and certainly academics. And there's not a day that goes by, Tommy's car, first car in the parking lot, at 6 a.m, and many times last car to leave. Extraordinarily hardworking guy. I think
Welcome back to Bowlaholics. My name is Sam Israel. I am joined by Ian Mills. And Ian, after 9 seasons serving as the Binghamton head coach, Tommy Dempsey's contract will not be renewed. Patrick Elliott, who is the athletic director for Binghamton University, made that announcement last week. He will be replaced by Lewell Sanders, who has been the assistant head coach for the Binghamton Bearcats. He will now be the interim head coach for the Bearcats next season. And the Binghamton Athletics, they will conduct their search for the new head coach, permanent head coach, next spring. This all comes after, of course, Ian Mills, when Binghamton lost against Hartford in the America East playoffs. They lost 77-60. Ian, what are your initial reactions to this firing of coach, not firing, but letting go of head coach Tommy Dempsey?
For all intents and purposes, I guess it is a firing, but I mean, it makes sense in terms of probably for both parties at this point, honestly. I understand for Tommy Dempsey, it's probably a home for him. He's been here for 9 years, but when you don't perform in the setting, when you don't produce wins like he had, I mean, he really hasn't produced wins ever since he's been here. And that's not a slight against him. It's just, I think it's just the nature of potentially just Binghamton basketball and the focus of the program. And I think, for Binghamton going from here, they have to realize, we hired this guy, and for 9 years we didn't win. And that's not necessarily his fault. I don't think that's entirely his fault. I think college coaching is important more from a scouting perspective than an actual gameplay perspective. Binghamton has to realize right now that they're still in a rebuilding process like they've always been, and how important to them is their athletic program, how important to them is the basketball program. Because in terms of school growth, in terms of a growth of a school, I think a lot of the times, right, national notoriety comes a lot of the times through athletics. And a big one really is football, which obviously Binghamton doesn't have. It comes down to basketball, essentially. And that notoriety isn't going to come with at least some type of competitiveness. Like UMBC a couple years ago, nobody knew who they were. They're in Binghamton's conference just because they made the tournament, upset a team. They were huge for months. Vermont last year, even though the tournament didn't happen, were in the Northeast at least huge, and they're in Binghamton's conference. It's not like these schools are, it's impossible for them to get big. It is certainly possible. It just depends on the school's focus. So, it makes sense for Binghamton, but they have to ask themselves, right? If you just hire another guy, the same thing is going to happen unless you try to change something, internally in your focus. Obviously, Binghamton's a great academic school, but athletically, it's one of the worst D1 schools in the nation. And if they want that to change, changes will have to be made, right, for that to spark that change.
Yeah, and just before I discuss my reactions to the firing, well, I'm going to discuss my reactions right now. And I want to say just to Tommy Dempsey, as a person, I think Tommy Dempsey is a really good person. And when I went to my first in-person press conference for Pipe Dream for the upcoming playoff game, I saw him talking to his players, talking to Brenton Mills, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "How are you doing in your classes? How's your class today?" It wasn't just about caring about the wins or caring about the athletes, just to care about athletes, but it's about caring about the people, the students behind the athlete. So, and to me personally, he sort of like gave me the, a little bit of a dab, when I, after I asked him the question, and, Dempsey, just a good person. And I understand, obviously, you look at the records and the record's going to say what the record says. And I'm not by any means saying that Dempsey was, unjust. No, I'm not trying to say that like Dempsey shouldn't have been fired by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. But this season was very difficult for Dempsey and the college Binghamton athletes because you have COVID-19, which prevents your team from practicing in the fall season and in the off season, quite frankly, because of COVID-19. You had one of your best players in Thomas Bruce, who was dealing with injuries all season, not playing in various Binghamton games. There were lots of games this season where it was 5 games where they were only down by a possession in the final minute of a game, and yet they couldn't get those wins. But then again, the record says what the record says, Ian, and there's nothing disputing that. And listen, you can't put all this blame once again on Coach Dempsey. I would also say, because Coach Dempsey came in 2012, obviously, and the last time the Binghamton Bearcats were really relevant, Ian, was when they made the NCAA tournament in 2009. And then we all know what happened with the scandal. There was a Binghamton scandal and, academics and ethical scandals. And it was difficult. And there was another coach before that. And then Dempsey in 2012 was hired. And he was going to be the guy that we all hoped was going to put Binghamton back on the maps. And honestly, I will say that Dempsey was good in recruiting players. Prior to this season, we've had 2 back-to-back Rookie of the Year selections in Sam Sessoms and George Tinsley. Sam Sessoms led the America East in scoring at 19 points a game when he was a sophomore. We have a good sophomore core, so the recruiting is good, but the wins is what really matters if you want to be a head coach. And look, the numbers, you can't stray away from what the numbers say no matter what. It's undisputable. You look at this past season, Binghamton 4-14 in overall play, 4-10 in conference play. Let's not also mention that your team started off 1-12. So you have that horrendous start. And obviously, look, COVID's a concern. You're missing one of your best players, arguably the best defensive player in the America East in Thomas Bruce. But again, at the end of the day, people care about the wins. And if you want to be able to keep these kind of jobs, or keep that kind of job, you have to produce the wins. And it seems like Coach Dempsey just couldn't do that in his tenure.
Yeah, no, you brought up the scanning line. I think that makes sense, right? When you look at his tenure with Binghamton, right? Like, he was the guy that was to set everything back on track. He was the guy who was essentially like the buffer into, we have to forget about this awful thing. Not forget about it, but learn from it, right? And grow from it. And you're right, he did do a very good job at that. I mean, and I talked to him at press conferences. I've only seen him once or twice at press conferences, and I would say the same thing. But you're right, like, the wins do matter. And if you go, I guess this year, really, you couldn't really go to games, but the year previously, you went to games, there weren't students there. Like, it was all people around Binghamton area, people who lived in the area, people who went to Broome Community College. It wasn't Binghamton University students, and I think that's a problem. Because if you're not winning, you're not getting kids to go to the games, right? No one's going to care. But if you're not winning, the kids aren't going to go. And I think Binghamton lacks that school spirit because really there is nothing to get around. Like, even right, like, if they were just good, even kids who didn't care about basketball would go just to be part of Binghamton University. And obviously you couldn't have done that this year. Regardless, even if they were winning, it wouldn't have mattered. But I think I do think the wins matter, and everything comes after. If you just start to win, everything kind of comes easier, right? Either recruits come in easier, and the attendance does as well. And right now, I mean, you're at a position where the last 9 years they've cared about getting rid of or forgetting or learning from the scandals, and I think they've done that. Now their focus, right, not just should be on that, but winning. And you talked about the recruiting. Oh yeah, Sam Sessoms, Brenton Mills, George Tinsley, great signing. Well, Sam Sessoms left. You know what I mean? Like,
Sessoms left, but they recruited him in the first place, and you have to give him respect. He was able to recruit and bring him Sam Sessoms.
He was able to recruit him, but he wasn't able to retain him. And that's not necessarily his fault. I'm just saying the fact that you can bring in the talent and utilize Sam Sessoms enough to get him to be the Rookie of the Year, to get him to the highest scoring player in American East that year, yet you're still last in the conference. So You're right. There is a bit of a dysfunction, and I think Binghamton at this point should be ready to move on from the past and just at this point hope to get some wins.
Yeah, undoubtedly. But one other thing that, again, like with Coach Dempsey and other Binghamton players is, again, this tells about the character. When Sam Sessoms announced that he was going to Penn State, they all supported him. They all had his back because it's bigger than basketball, Ian. Like, they understand that Sam Sessoms has a chance to do something big. You know, Sam Sessoms, for what Sam Sessoms thinks, that he might be able to arguably make his way to the NBA. Like, he's trying to right now get a spot in the NBA. So for him, it wasn't so much I'm leaving this Binghamton team because they're dysfunctional. It was, I'm going to leave the America East, which is sort of a less emphasized conference, and go to a bigger conference where I can get more coverage and potentially on a bigger a roster that has a chance to make it to the NCAA and do some damage. So that was really the rationale behind Sam Sessoms leaving, in my opinion. And the fact that Tommy Dempsey and other Binghamton players supported that move, I think that shows the character of Tommy Dempsey to get behind his back. Now, right. I will also say, yeah, what you go.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to cut him. You're right. No, like the character absolutely does matter, and the fact that they support him and his decision is great. But the problem is it's not like the American. I mean, you're right. The American East doesn't get as much attention as the Big Ten or the ACC or whatever conference, right? Obviously, but there are guys in the American East getting drafted. Vermont had a couple of guys drafted last year. Anthony Lamb's on the NBA roster. So it's. I don't think it's an American East problem. I think it's a Binghamton problem. I think it's so. I'm not blaming Sam Sessoms, and obviously I wholeheartedly think it's a great thing that Tommy Dempsey and everyone support his decision, because you're right, he does have a chance to get to the NBA, and obviously Penn State gives him that better chance of getting to
more
the
spotlight,
NBA.
more coverage.
Right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I'm optimistic about this new guy, the assistant coach Lewell Sanders. I've heard really good things about him. I know he's been overseas. He's played overseas. He played college at Seton Hall. And he coached also in the Czech Republic, I believe, overseas. And he's been a Binghamton assistant coach for the past 2 years. So I'm looking for him next season maybe to try and prove to the athletic director and to Binghamton University that he could be potentially a permanent head coach in the future for this organization. And I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, any fresh breath there, a guy who's experienced, at least in the Binghamton system, a guy who knows the players, probably the players resonate with. That's probably why he got the job.
Yes.
I think that's definitely a great hire, even if it is just for the year. And again, if he does perform, right, even if they go 500 next year, even if their record is 11-11, depending on how many games they play, I mean, that's good. I mean, that's way better than they've done the last couple of years. So I agree. That's probably a good hire.
Well, the goal is just a steady improvement. You want to be able to see a gradual improvement. And we were hoping, obviously, after the scandal occurred, you're trying to bring the Binghamton Bearcat program up. And it seemed like Coach Dempsey had trouble doing that. But again, we don't need to see a major jump. You don't have to actually win the America East next year by all means, but you can gradually win a little more games every single season. That's the goal. That's the ideal, and we'll see what he's able to do. I would also add that, given the current landscape of COVID-19, I think it's a really smart decision to bring in someone from the organization, from the coaching squad, from the coaching staff that already has pre-existing relationships built with these players, because I think that's going to be necessary, for now during this COVID landscape. And once COVID subsides, then you could determine and evaluate if you'd want to keep Lewell Sanders to be the permanent head coach, or if you do want to look and carry out an external head coaching search.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. COVID doesn't affect this, and for the transition to be so quick, you don't have to do like a hiring process. Basically, the guy just is elevated. He's essentially just elevated, and the fact that they, he already knows the players helps a lot, as I've said. So yeah, I think it's a good hire. I will obviously root for them next year, and I hope the best.
Of course.
I will say I don't know where my expectations are. Last year we did a end of year recap. Kush and I did it, and we were extremely optimistic. I'm not going to do that again to myself, because I was trying to be nice, and that was just stupid. I think
you're being optimistic. You're being optimistic, Ian. You're being optimistic.
Yeah, I was being optimistic, and now I'm not going to be as optimistic. I will say that I think they will improve. I think, a new breath of breath air in there, a new guy to shake things up potentially, maybe get some different types of recruits instead of just grad student guys. Could be huge.
Well, here's what really encourages me about this team. You look at the Binghamton Bearcats, full of young players. This year we had a lot of sophomores. You have Tyler Bertram, you have Dan Petcash, Bryce Beamer, Brenton Mills. These guys are all sophomores, and under the new NCAA rules, they get a year back. So technically they're all freshmen. So it's a very young team. And this guy, Lewell Williams, is known for his developing young players, his teaching style, and being able to develop young talent. So his strength, apparently Lewell Williams' strength, is developing young players, and his Binghamton team features many, many, many young players. So I'm hoping that Lewell's strength can play into the team's strength. And looking at it, I'm gonna be optimistic. I'll be optimistic. I'm gonna be optimistic. I think we can make some noise next year. I'm optimistic.
I mean, I'd love to be, but I don't want to burn myself again.
I'm not saying it. I'm not saying that they necessarily are going to win the America East and go to the NCAA and win the tournament. But I'm not saying they're not going to do. I mean, I'm not putting any kind of expectation on them. But I'm saying that I'm excited for this team next season. I think now that they're going to have hopefully an off season, they're going to have a spring and fall off season to prepare for the season. That's optimistic for me. And once again, I hope Tommy Dempsey is able to find something. Obviously, being a sports head coach is like a dream for a lot of people. You get that taken away from you, to get the keys taken away from you, and now you have these other public, you have the media companies talking about you. It's tough, but I really do believe that Coach Dempsey will find an opportunity. But this Binghamton Bearcats team, I'm excited for next year under the new head coach, Lewell Williams. Sanders, my apologies. Lewell Sanders.
Yeah, no, I think Tommy Dempsey's going to be all right. He was a head coach before Binghamton. He'll be a head coach, maybe not D1, but somewhere else. I don't think, he's going to be too worried about us talking about but any media companies. I'm sure he'll be all right. But, he's a great guy and he knows basketball, so he'll be all right. And I'm excited too next year. I hate to be pessimistic, but I'm excited to see what happens next year.
We'll be pessimistic, Ian. Then again, you never know,
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm excited for this team next year. Just take some time in the off season, reflect a little bit, and get back at it. And maybe one day, Ian, in our lifetime, the Bearcats will win the NCAA tournament.
Binghamton needs to find their Ja Morant, their 0-star recruit who's just insane.
I'm optimistic, Ian. All right, Ian. That covers it for Ballaholics. We'll see what happens next year with the Binghamton Bearcats team. Me and Ian are hyped. You guys can tell we're so optimistic. We got this. And we'll see you guys next week. We'll discuss some NBA, NFL, some major sports headlines, unlike college headlines. But, this is our team, Binghamton Bearcats, our college team. We got to cover you guys. Thank you guys for watching today.
Luck. See you guys.